Welcome to another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. You're listening to a special podcast series titled Highest Power, Church and State, featuring writer, poet, and musician Rick Pidcock. Now here's Rick.
We have yet another mass shooting in the United States as an Army sergeant at Fort Stewart in Georgia allegedly used a personal handgun and started shooting at his coworkers, hitting 5 of them. Thankfully, all 5 of the victims have been listed in stable condition. According to CNN, the suspect had an argument the previous day with one of the people he shot. A law enforcement official told CNN that the next day, the suspect showed up with a 9mm handgun, shot the victim in the chest when they entered a maintenance area, and then shot 4 more people. Other soldiers in the area then tackled the shooter and held him until the police arrived. Of course, as usual, Republicans are once again claiming that now is not the time to discuss gun control policies, and with the mass shooting defined by Gun Violence Archive as at least 4 people other than the shooter being injured or killed, given the fact that we've been averaging 1 mass shooting a day this year, if we held ourselves to the GOP's standard here, we'd never talk about it. Unfortunately, due to the state of Congress, the White House, and the courts today, discussing policy ideas kind of feels like an empty waste of time. Like, who are we kidding? Does anybody think the GOP is going to start taking gun violence seriously and pass effective legislation for Trump to sign? Of course, we probably should discuss policies, as helpless as we may feel, but is there something else we can talk about and try to affect in some way? I wrote a piece 4 years ago for Baptist News Global on July 19th, 2021. It was titled, "While we're talking about guns in America, let's talk about our fear-based theology that also drives gun sales." So I'd like to take some time for this episode to read through that piece because I think that while we may not have the power right now to affect policy today, we do have the power to affect fear in theology today. And as we'll see in this piece, that affects real gun sales. So I'm going to read the piece, and then at the end, I'll share some reflections for today. The piece is titled, "While we're talking about guns in America, let's talk about our fear-based theology that also drives gun sales." It was published on July 19th, 2021. The sound of skidding tires filled the air as the car spun around. The window rolled down, and an arm reached out. It wasn't until the 3rd shot that I realized that I was staring down the barrel of a gun. With nowhere to hide, a man within 10 feet of me getting hit, and the gun turning my direction, I immediately fell to the ground as multiple shots went above my head and the car sped away. Thankfully, we all survived. A few years later, I was in the parking lot at my pizza delivery job with my manager when a man armed with a machete ordered us into the store. I slowly walked away, called 911, and talked with the dispatcher as the armed man robbed 3 stores. Then when my wife was 38 weeks pregnant, I woke up one night to hands touching my feet. Initially, I assumed it was my wife walking through the dark, but then I turned to my left and noticed that she was still in bed with me. When I looked back to the foot of my bed, there was the outline of a man staring down at us. I lunged at him while yelling for my wife to turn on the lights, and when she did, we saw that the man had stripped down to his underwear. 2 days later, when the intruder knocked on our door to apologize after being released by the police, I told him, "If I had a gun, you could have died." America and guns, it's complicated. The relationship in America between weapons, violence, and self-defense is complicated. Guns are used every day to threaten or take innocent lives. Yet, even when guns are not involved, other weapons can be utilized. While there are many Americans who use weapons for self-defense, using those weapons to kill may lead to unnecessary deaths. In the case of my intruder, I let him use the restroom and gave him a blanket to wrap up in so he could sleep until the police arrived. Automatically shooting him for being at my bed in his underwear at 3 a.m. may have made logical sense to many, but would have been totally unnecessary. Yet, if he had a weapon and was dangerous, my wife and I could have been killed. To complicate these scenarios even further, we have the Second Amendment that has allowed a well-regulated militia from more than 2 centuries ago to be interpreted as a guarantee for individuals today to carry AR-15s with total animosity for any talk of regulations. It is no wonder, then, that Americans are deeply divided over how to process these complex scenarios and priorities. 363 mass shootings already this year. According to the Gun Violence Archive, there had been 363 mass shootings in the United States in 2021 as of July 17th, with a mass shooting being defined as at least 4 people other than the shooter being injured or killed. There have been 24,049 gun-related deaths during this time, including 1,166 verified unintentional shootings. The Washington Post recently reported that 2020 was the deadliest year of gun violence in at least 2 decades, and that 2021 is outpacing 2020 for the number of people killed by guns. Unprecedented increase in gun sales. Our collective fear of one another, combined with the hopeless levels of inequality and the continued spread of police violence in the midst of the pressures of the pandemic, have led to an unprecedented number of people purchasing guns for the first time. According to data from a survey taken by the University of Chicago, gun ownership in America went from 32% to 39% in 2020. The Washington Post reported the stories of people who had been against guns for many years suddenly buying them for the first time. They quoted one woman saying, "I never felt like I would want to own a gun because of the damage I thought they'd do to people. But when I started feeling unsafe, all of that changed." Despite these unprecedented levels of gun violence and the growth in gun sales, Americans are sharply divided over what to do about it. According to a national tracking poll taken by Politico June 18th to 20th, 2021, 43% of registered voters trust Republicans, while 41% trust Democrats in handling gun policy. The most pronounced differences are related to ethnicity and religion. Regarding ethnicity, just 37% of white voters and 41% of Hispanic voters trust the Democrats, compared to 62% of black voters. While 48% of white voters and 38% of Hispanic voters trust the Republicans, just 17% of black voters trust the Republicans. Regarding religion, atheists trust the Democrats to handle gun policy better than Republicans by a margin of 63% to 25%, while evangelicals trust the Republicans over the Democrats 58% to 30%. And while 49% of atheists believe that passing additional gun restrictions should be a top priority, just 23% of evangelicals do. Due to our extreme divides along ethnic, religious, and political lines, arriving at policies that unite us and solve our problem is going to be nearly impossible, although still necessary to move forward. In addition to discussing where and how we purchase guns, we need to begin asking why we are purchasing so many. Fueled by fear and anger. The only time I've held a loaded gun was once as a teenager. My friend and I were walking through the Georgia woods to go hunting, and while I never went hunting again, I understand that many people purchase guns to hunt for food for their families. Having grown up in Georgia, I also understand that many people purchase guns to hunt for sport. As someone who has moved more into a contemplative mysticism that sees and loves the relationship of all in creation, I do not personally resonate with these motivations. While I may not resonate with these motivations, I recognize that some do. But these are not the reasons that gun sales are soaring. The top reasons experts say gun sales and gun violence are soaring are fear and anger. Bernard Golden recently wrote in Psychology Today that the desire for mental and physical safety is a core motivational force for all of us. During this season of sharp disagreements, rising violence, and millions of people dying in the pandemic, our mental and physical safety are being threatened at a level most people who are alive today have never had to process. Golden explains how fear can cause us to enter into withdrawal in a way that triggers our anger when it becomes excessive anxiety. He says that when we feel the loss of control, anger can be energizing and empowering. While Golden recognizes that anger can be a powerful fuel for the positive pursuit of championing a cause, such as at peaceful protests, he also explains that it can become a way to create distance in a relationship or exert control, as in bullying. Now imagine a country that was built by violence over others, that has seen a rise in vitriolic political rhetoric led by a president who fueled an insurrection attempt, that believes justice is to be enacted through violent retribution, and that has been overcome with fear and anxiety. Imagine that country, full of anger, that feels the need to exert control while having a constitutional right to take semi-automatic weapons out in public. Grasping for control. This fear-fueled grasping of control over others is a cultural phenomenon rooted in a theology that goes back for centuries. In a recent interview, Wendell Griffin told me the story of a black preacher named William Augustus Jones who wrote God and the Ghetto. Griffin said that he heard Jones speak 40 years ago at a pastor's conference hosted by Arkansas Baptist College. During a sermon, Jones said, "Bad theology produces demented psychology. Demented psychology produces dysfunctional sociology. Dysfunctional sociology always produces oppressive anthropology, and then they always produce oppressive economics and ideologies." Griffin reflected, "It all flows from bad theology. If your notion of God is wrong or flawed, your notion of self and others and power is wrong." David Bentley Hart spoke of how our theology of God fuels our power dynamics toward others recently, saying that Western Christianity has believed in a God of absolute sovereign will and power, who's sort of a cartoon of a king on his throne with absolute privilege and potency. And then that becomes the model of the sovereign self, because the self becomes a mirror of the God who is most high, so that the pure sovereign God of 16th and 17th century theology becomes a reflection of the absolute sovereign of the emerging nation state. In other words, our hierarchical theology of God at the top exerting absolute control over everyone below has been mirrored in the way America has built a nation state by exerting power and control over everyone white supremacists deemed lower on the hierarchy. Hart continued, "By the end of the 16th and 17th centuries, it's gotten to the point where God is a bit of a bad guy, just a tyrant, a sovereign, just pure predestining, absolute power, exercising itself for the sake of power. And then that becomes the paradigm for what it is to be human, to be a sovereign individual self. To be free is to be a little God." The gun conversation we're not having. It is no wonder that our American culture, which has been shaped by a theology of God exercising absolute divine control through the retributive justice of violent anger against all who threaten his power, would interpret freedom as their mirroring of that God toward those who threaten their power. As we continue conversing about gun violence, we need to be willing to give some room for those who want to defend or feed their families. We need to give space for differences of opinion on gun-related policies due to the complex nature of how violence occurs. But we also need to be willing to move inward and reflect on the fear and anger within us that are being harnessed by our theologies of control, to consider to what degree our claims of freedom to bear arms have become the freedom of little gods, trying to hold on to lost control by mirroring a God who enacts justice through violence. And that is the end of the piece. So I'd like to share a few updates and reflections since it's been 4 years and we're still dealing with the same issues with no end in sight. In the piece, I mentioned how gun ownership went up from 32% to 39% in 2020, and this trend unfortunately has continued. According to Gallup, in 2024, 48% of U.S. households said they have a gun in their home. And what's interesting is how this breaks down between Republicans and Democrats and men and women. So while Republican women have increased in gun ownership by 14% and independent women have increased in gun ownership by 2%, Democratic women have actually decreased in gun ownership by 1%. And while Republican men have increased in gun ownership by 3%, independent men have decreased in gun ownership by 5%, and Democratic men have decreased by 7%. So to put some raw numbers on this, 33% of Republican women own guns, while 18% of independent women and just 12% of Democratic women own guns. That's quite a jump. 33% of Republican women compared to 12% of Democratic women. Also, 60% of Republican men own guns, while 39% of independent men own guns, and just 29% of Democratic men own guns. And remember the trends. We're trending toward fewer Democrats owning guns, and even more Republicans owning guns. So, going back to the article I wrote in 2021, I said that the top reasons experts say gun sales and gun violence are soaring are fear and anger. And that also, in the story yesterday, this week, about the shooting, appears to be on display as the shooter was angry over a disagreement. So you put all this together, And then we combine this with research from the Public Religion Research Institute. According to the PRRI, Republicans are 2.5 times more likely than Democrats to support political violence. 1/3 of Republicans, 33%, believe that true American patriots may have to resort to violence to save the country, compared to just 22% of independents and 13% of Democrats. Notice the parallels here between the percentage of Republicans to Democrats owning guns and the percentage of Republicans to Democrats believing that violence may be necessary. The second thing PRI found was that even among Republicans, you can see the influence of the MAGA movement. Republicans who hold favorable views of Trump are nearly 3 times as likely as Republicans who have unfavorable views of Trump, 41% versus 16% respectively, to agree that true American patriots may have to resort to violence to save the country. This is taken from an article at Baptist News that was written by Robert P. Jones, who runs the PRRI. And then finally, more than 3 in 10 white evangelical Protestants, 31%, compared to no more than 1/4 of any other religious group, agree that true American patriots may have to resort to violence to save the country. Notably, church attendance has no mitigating effect on support for political violence. I'm not suggesting here, based off of all of this data about gun sales and what I just read from the PRRI, I'm not suggesting that the shooter at Fort Stewart was a white evangelical who was motivated by white evangelical theologies of fear and anger. But what I am saying is that we have a broader cultural problem here that needs to be dealt with. And we need to consider which theological scripts are becoming embedded into the values of our society, and which theological scripts are offering a better word. As I said at the close of episode 36 on Alligator Alcatraz, once you realize that white evangelicals are willing to celebrate as good news a justice that includes billions of their neighbors swimming and screaming in a volcano forever for not submitting to their theology, Alligator Alcatraz t-shirt stands make all the sense in the world. We may not have the legislative power to do anything about violence in the state right now, but we can affect the values of the church. And that's why we need Christians who are secure enough in their relationship with God to call out theologies of justice that celebrate retributive violence. As long as you're afraid that God is violently angry and threatens to roast you alive forever for questioning this, you're unlikely to question theologies of justice that attempt to make things right through violence. And instead, you're probably only going to perpetuate and embody fear and anger to the point where we see the purchasing of gun sales in the GOP far outnumbering the gun sales on the left and trending even higher. Until we fundamentally reconsider what we mean by making things right and repent of any hints of violence, until we rejoice only in the liberating work of healing and wholeness, our systemic problems will continue to fester. The reason the United States has a uniquely violent gun problem is that the United States has a uniquely violent gospel problem. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Please like, subscribe, and rate us on your favorite podcast platform, and we'll be back with another episode on Monday.
This has been another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. The episode you've just heard is part of a special podcast series titled Highest Power, Church and State. Be sure to follow B&G daily at baptistnews.com and subscribe to get notifications about future episodes. Baptist News Global is a national nonprofit news service that is independent, free, and faithful. B&G is supported by readers and listeners like you. Learn more at baptistnews.com.
This episode was produced and edited by Mac Bowles of TKG Communications, LLC, Dallas, Texas.